This video was brought to you by Brilliant. On Sunday evening, Russia claimed to have thwarted a major Ukrainian offensive in Donbass, involving thousands of Ukrainian troops. Now, while the reports were originally denied by Kyiv, there's since been a massive uptick in activity across the entire front line in Ukraine, and it really does look like Ukraine's much anticipated counteroffensive has begun. So in this video, we're going to take a look at what's happened so far, what might happen next, and perhaps most importantly, who blew up the Nova Kakhovka Dam. Before we start, if you haven't already, please consider subscribing and ringing the bell to stay in the loop and be notified when we release new videos. So, the first thing we should say in anticipation of the angry comments, we know that the Ukrainian armed forces have requested operational silence on this issue, but nothing in this video violates that or could put any Ukrainian troops at risk. Almost all of the information from this video is coming from Russian Telegram channels, and it's stuff that Russian military bloggers, let alone the Kremlin, are already aware of. Anyway, with that being said, let's get into it. On Sunday, Russia's defense ministry claimed that it had thwarted a major Ukrainian attack in Donbass, apparently involving 8 Ukrainian battalions and thousands of Ukrainian troops. While the Ukrainians insisted that they didn't know what the Russians were talking about, the attack did come after a conspicuous uptick in artillery fire, and just a few hours after the Ukrainian military requested informational silence. Then, on Monday, Russian Telegram channels were alighted with reports of Ukrainian offensives across the 1,000-kilometer front line, and Ukraine's defense minister admitted that in some directions, Ukraine was moving to offensive actions. And the same day, a US Department of Defense official told Politico that US military satellites had reported a significant uptick in movement from Ukrainian positions. So even if the main effort hadn't started yet, by Monday it was abundantly clear that this was at least the beginning of Ukraine's much anticipated counteroffensive. At this point, however, it looks like we're mostly just seeing probing attacks, with Ukraine trying to find weak points in Russian defenses ahead of the main advance, which will probably be concentrated in one particular area. Now, there are two pieces of evidence to back this up. Firstly, it looks like Ukraine is still withholding their best weapon systems. Contrary to Russian claims, we're still yet to see a Leopard tank on the battlefield, which are presumably being withheld for the main advance. Secondly, the fact that Ukraine are attacking along nearly the entire front line suggests that they're probing for weaknesses in the Russian defenses. And that's simply illustrated by the staggering breadth of the Ukrainian offensive, with movement across the north and the south, rather than using more targeted strikes. For instance, reports of advances range from near Svatov, a town that lies along the P-66 highway, which supplies Russian troops in places like Severodonetsk, Lysychansk, and Bakhmut. But they're also pushing the Russians back on the flanks of the north and south of Bakhmut, with a significant increase in the shelling of Bakhmut itself, where Wagner were recently replaced by the standard Russian army. There have also been reports of Ukrainian advances around Horlivka, a town that sits between Donetsk city and Bakhmut. And there's also been a significant uptick in Ukrainian artillery along the front lines of the Zaporizhia Oblast, where the Russians have spent the last few months digging lines of defensive trenches. You get the idea then. The Ukrainians are pushing back along the entire front line, which suggests that this is more of a probing attack than a more targeted offensive. Now, based on this, we can assume that Kyiv also planned on attacking the front lines in Kherson, as they have everywhere else. But on Tuesday morning at about 2:30 a.m., the Nova Kakhovka Dam was blown up, flooding the entire front line. Now, the Nova Kakhovka Dam is by far and away the largest dam in Ukraine, and it sits on the Dnipro River to the northeast of Kherson city. Now, prior to its destruction, the dam held back approximately 18 cubic kilometers of water, and as a result, the destruction will likely lead to the flooding of 80 or so Ukrainian settlements, mostly on the east side of the Dnipro. as well as at least the partial flooding of Kherson city itself, which is currently controlled by the Ukrainians. Now, at the time of writing, we're yet to see the worst effects of the dam breach, and the wave created by the breach is expected to reach Kherson city in the late hours of Tuesday or the early hours of Wednesday morning. All in all, this will put an estimated 16,000 lives at risk and require an enormous evacuation. When we do know more about the specifics of this, we'll be sure to pin a comment on this video, so keep an eye out for that. Anyway, while we don't know the exact details of that just yet, what we do know is that this wasn't a total surprise. During the face-off, before the Russians withdrew from Kherson in September of last year, both sides claimed that the other was planning on blowing up the dam. The Russians claimed that the Ukrainians were planning to blow it up to flood the Russians out of Kherson, and Zelensky claimed that Ukrainian intelligence had found evidence that the Russians had mined the dam so that they could flood the city when it was returned to Ukraine. Now, obviously, neither of these things came to pass in September, but unsurprisingly, this time round, both sides have blamed each other here. But looking at the evidence, it strongly suggests that the Russians did it. Kherson city, which will probably be flooded, is currently occupied by the Ukrainians. And as such, this looks like a tactic from the Russians to prevent the Ukrainians from staging a counteroffensive in the south towards Crimea. In fact, on Telegram, Russian soldiers even bragged about blowing up the dam as a means to stop the Ukrainian counteroffensive. And it's not just that either. The Russians have form in this respect. In mid-September, Russian cruise missiles blew up another dam in Ukraine, causing extensive flooding. Now, not only is this a war crime under the Geneva Convention, but the dam's destruction could also have severe long-term consequences too. The dam itself provides electricity to some 3 million people and 80% of Crimea's fresh water. But on top of that, it could also damage the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, which sits on the left bank of the Dnipro River and relies on water from the dam for its cooling systems. Now, fortunately, the reactors should still have enough water to starve off a nuclear disaster for a while, and the International Atomic Energy Agency reckons that there's no immediate nuclear safety risk. Nonetheless, though, the risk of a nuclear incident in Ukraine is now greater than ever. And while, of course, this is terrible news, it does suggest that the Russians are getting desperate. And if Ukraine can definitely prove it was Russia, this will put immense pressure on countries like China and India to take a more active stance against Putin's regime. Ultimately, with the story developing, it's hard to know exactly what will happen next. And when making videos like this, we rely on a ton of data analysis to interpret military strategy and economic objectives. And that kind of analysis isn't just crucial for our jobs. As the world becomes more driven by AI and data, your job will likely require more analytical skills too. Fortunately though, you don't have to be left behind if you jump onto Brilliant. Brilliant.org is the STEM learning platform which can teach you all the skills you need for an increasingly digital workplace, from foundational and advanced maths to AI, data science, neural networks, and more. That means that the progression of tech and AI doesn't need to be intimidating. With easy-to-understand and interactive programs, you can level up your skills by spending just a few minutes a day on Brilliant. And you'll want to. Their programs have been directly built around the principles of active learning, so they're fun, interactive, and help you learn by doing. Plus, with new courses added all the time, there's no way that you're going to get left behind. To try everything that Brilliant has to offer for free for a full 30 days, click the link in the description. Plus, the first 200 of you to sign up will get 20% off Brilliant's annual premium subscription. As always, thanks to Brilliant, and thank you to you for your support.